There actually has been a negotiated buyout. If you did not hear about it, the way it was broken down to me was after the Notre Dame loss, which was a particularly embarrassing second half for Louisville, after playing well at Russ Smith's retirement ceremony, jersey retirement ceremony, getting blown out really in the second half and not playing any defense whatsoever. And then kind of getting thrown under the bus by his own players. Chris Mack apparently after that game made the decision that he had to get out of town. Not literally, but figuratively, move on, and that things were not going well. And so he made the first move, and the school and the coach met and talked over their buyout. I don't know if Mack was in that meeting or if a representative of Mack was in that meeting. I don't know how that all transpired, but at some point between the Notre Dame game and what we, saw, the fire coming, the smoke and then fire coming with this buyout, a couple days later, Mack's offer initially was, I'll take a $6 million buyout and leave now. Louisville countered with closer to like 3.5, which is how we ended up at the around 4.8 million buyout that Chris Mack ended up with, which is a bargain compared to the $12 million buyout that his contract stipulated, which was basically either that amount of money or the amount remaining on his contract, the amount of salary left on his contract, which were identical. It was 3 years on his contract. So that's where that all of a sudden has happened. So we're going to talk about that today. And there's a lot to get to with this, as you would expect. It was maybe surprising, Jack, that it happened now versus at the end of the season. But what I have seen in Chris Mack, and look, I don't know Chris Mack as well as like Jeff Goodman knows him really, really well. I know Brian Snow, the former 24/7 writer, knows him really well. Jody Demling here in town knows him really well and has spent a lot of time with him. I don't know him like that. Those guys are like friends. They are friends. I'm not friends with Chris Mack. We are work counterparts, I guess. We had a good relationship. But I could just tell his demeanor has just not been the same. Honestly, for a while. It goes back maybe to the summer after the pandemic hit. It just seemed like things really had started to sour for him, and he wasn't enjoying his job. And we're talking about a guy, Jack, who at Xavier had things rocking. I mean, he had things rocking. People can have all this revisionist history. Oh, a huge portion of our fan base didn't want this guy. Nobody wanted this guy. Get out of here with that absolute garbage. You had a few prominent former players who are very vocal about their disdain for modern Louisville, for the current or recent leadership, and they have their gripes that I have no problem with. I don't know enough about some of their issues to weigh in or feel confident that I should weigh in on this, but that was a very, very, very vocal, but very small amount of people who were talking about Kenny Payne, whose name will come up again later in this podcast. And everybody else on planet Earth either wanted Chris Mack or thought that David Padgett should be given the permanent job. There were no other. It was just like a couple of people tweeted about like Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan is not going to coach Louisville basketball. I'm sorry. Let's move on from that. Chris Mack was the coach. He was the coach of the year, the national coach of the year. He was a hot name, and he had it rocking at Xavier. And Jack, his demeanor was kind of a swagger, kind of a tough guy mentality, loved talking trash. Especially with crosstown rival Cincinnati. He was kind of prickly and just had that edge about him. And we just never really saw that at Louisville. It just never really seemed like he felt confident and comfortable acting like that at Louisville. So my first question for you, Jack, is as a guy who grew up here, I think stylistically, the fit just was not what it needed to be for Louisville. And as you know, as well as anyone, this city loves up-tempo pressing teams, or at least teams that play very frenetic defense and physical defense and create turnovers and run and play attractive basketball. And it just, the style fit never felt quite right, did it?
It didn't, but at the same time, if they would have won, people would have gotten over that very quickly. I mean, I think that's
fair.
To me, you talk about the culture and all that stuff and the pressing, the up-tempo offense, all that stuff. Yes, it's very true. Rick Pitino, who's the coach for 17 years before Chris Mack, and Denny Crum, the coach for 3 decades before Pitino. So you're talking about an almost 50-year span. They played up-tempo, pressing defenses, full court pressure, lots of athletes, exciting to watch, the doctors a dunk, all that stuff. That's all true. But at the end of the day, they were so loved because they won 3 national titles and went to 9 Final Fours in that time. I mean, so if Chris Mack would have had the success that he had in 2020, which of course, unfortunately for him, there wasn't a tournament because of the pandemic. If he would have sustained that, people wouldn't care about the pack line or how slow they played or anything like that. It comes down to, look, for someone my age, you look at, there's different generations of Louisville fans. There's the people that grew up in the 70s and the 80s with the Final Fours and the national titles of that era. There's the people that grew up in the 90s where they didn't win any titles, but they were still a national threat year after year after year, a bunch of second weekends. And then look, the first year I remember of Louisville basketball, 2002, 2003. Reese Gaines, freshman Francisco Garcia, Taekwon Dean, loved that team. That team made me love basketball. They were as high as number 2 in the polls. They did. They were high as number 2 in the polls. Ellis Miles blows his knee out. They're a 4 seed. Great team. They lost to Butler in the round of 32, but a really good team. They make a Final Four in 2005, a couple years later. You take that stretch of 2005 to 2015, which isn't the greatest stretch in Louisville basketball history, but the second greatest stretch of Louisville basketball history, where you go to 7 second weekends in a decade span, make 3 Final Fours, and win a title. Like, for me, growing up, I just expected Louisville to be in the Sweet 16. I did, every single year. Like, it was not a question of if they make the second weekend or if they make the tournament. It was, okay, Sweet 16, Rick Pitino never loses in the Sweet 16. You feel like you're in the Elite 8 every single year. Like, it's an insane thing to think back right now about how high the expectations.
But it's true. That's how people think.
Yes.
Jack. That's how people think.
Yes.
Like, the funny thing is that 2011 lost to Morehead State in I think it was a 4-13 game.
Yeah.
Is still talked to. It's like somebody's family member died for Louisville fans. It's like a traumatic experience that they actually were upset in the NCAA.
I can remember exactly where I was for that. I was in 6th grade at Mesquite Middle School, track and field practice. I was an absolute crap shot put thrower. And I was listening to Paul Rogers on the broadcast as we took laps around the school. And I ran back up into the room at the end and I saw whatever his name is from Morehead State. I forget the guy's name. Hit the 3 to win it.
Fareed? The 3.
No. Yeah, obviously Fareed was the stud on that team, but the guy that hit the 3 for Morehead to win the game's like. But yeah, even that year, I mean, that was the quote unquote bridge year. That was the quote unquote bad year.
4 seed.
Is being a 4 seed, taking Kemba Walker and the UConn team that won the title down to the wire in the Big East tournament and being a 4 seed. That was the bad year, was being a 4 seed. So, I mean, it was never going to be that. And people talk about being the guy that follows the legend all the time. Like, Chris Mack was put in an impossible situation. But at the end of the day, I don't blame that for why he's getting fired. He's getting fired because you have those expectations. You have that set in stone to where you expect to be that good all the time. And you can take a little bit of a drop off on that and be okay. But you can't miss the tournament as a bubble team. And then follow that up with being 11-9 and 5-5 in a terrible ACC and being closer to the CBI than the NCAA tournament. That's not acceptable at Louisville. It's not. It's just not what the program is used to. That's not the standards of the program and what people are used to. Chris Mack is a really good coach. He had a great success at Xavier. If he decides he wants to coach again at some point, we don't know if he's going to do that at this stage. He could be a good coach somewhere else. But at the end of the day is you can't have those 2 back-to-back years at Louisville and on top of it have the Dino Gaudio scandal on top of it as well. But at the end of the day, it comes down to winning, and Chris Mack didn't win nearly enough to keep the job.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be, and that's a very succinct way of putting it all together. There's going to be a lot of hindsight type thoughts on this, and that's fine. That's a natural thing. But,
I mean, you look at if there's a tournament in 2020 and he has a team that's going to be a 2, 3, or 4 seed.
You win 1 or 2 different games last year. I mean, there's a lot of it, but here's a couple of things that I would say. I will maintain that you are totally right, that the top most important thing was you got to win games at Louisville, and they didn't the last year and this year. Did he get dealt a tough hand with the looming NCAA, whatever?
Absolutely.
Absolutely he did. There's no question about it. Whoever took over was at least going to have to swim head on into a strong current in the recruiting waters, at least for now. COVID, obviously a huge factor, but other coaches have figured out ways to navigate those waters. You just keep looking at all the other schools that are dealing with the same FBI case infraction stuff, and they're recruiting fine, and they're competing at a high level. And on top of all of that, I think deep down, number one most important thing for how this arrived, they weren't winning games. Number two, the coach did not appear to have his heart in it in the last year or so. Something happened along the way where the side of Chris Mack and this side of Chris Mack exists, who would rather just be on a boat somewhere fishing or be at the beach or what. And we all have a side like that. We all do. I
don't blame him.
I'm not trying to be personal. That's just part of his personality. That's fine. But that side of him is lurking there. It's dude, you've made all this money. You don't need this. You don't need this experience where if you win a game 60-58, people complain for the next 4 days about the style of play until you play Duke. And then whatever happens in that game, and if you lose, people are all over you. It's high intensity. And it's not that I don't think Mac wasn't up for that. I just don't know. I think he kind of underestimated where the water would flow here. When you put your finger down on water flowing down a street and it splits in all the different directions, I'm not sure that he understood all the directions that they were going to go. This is a very complicated job for most coaches. Not a lot of people can come here and have success. The reason that Denny Crum and Rick Pitino, who are the two modern coaches that we can refer to, and I know there's other greats like Peck Hickman from years past who are great coaches as well, but the reason those two guys were legend Hall of Fame coaches and would have been strongly considered among the greatest coaches in college basketball history with just, and I'm talking mostly about Pitino right now, with just his time at Louisville, just his work at Louisville, he would be considered one of the best coaches in college basketball. And Denny Crum, obviously his whole career is built up as a head coach at Louisville, is because of force of personality. They enjoyed the spotlight. They thrived in the spotlight. They always left you wanting more, coming back for more. And most of all, they seemed to care more than the fans. And that's something that is, I think, significantly underrated about the experience that they had with Rick Pitino. You could talk about the headlines and all the things that happened in his tenure, all warranted. I still say it was warranted for them to move on from him. It had just become too much over the last few years. That being said, the guy, I think, is the best modern college basketball coach, purely X's and O's. If not the best, one of the top 2 or 3. And it's because he is completely immersed in it. He makes incredible in-game adjustments. He game preps better than anyone. He's obsessed with the basketball side of this job. And I'm not saying that Chris Mack didn't care about that side. Obviously he did. He cares a lot about that side. but Chris likes having other parts of his life. And he made that comment, Jack, towards the end of all of this. I can't remember which game it was after, where he was like, that's all I think about is like trying to figure out this team. That's all I think about.
It was either
sleep.
NC State.
I think it was Pitt. I think it was Pitt.
Yeah.
So it just never quite was a fit. And sometimes that happens.